I'm Danielle, 28 female. I live in a small, minimalist apartment in the city, a place that serves more as a charging station for my laptop and myself than a home. By day, and most nights, I run a boutique app development company I built from the ground up. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about my success, not really. It's about the night my family, who thought I was a complete failure, finally saw me for who I am, and the devastating silence that followed. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The invitation had arrived via a group text message from my mother, Eleanor, a week prior. It was a block of text, devoid of any real warmth, announcing a celebratory dinner for my younger sister, Jessica. She had just passed the bar exam on her first try, a feat that my mother had been broadcasting to every distant relative and former neighbor she could find on social media. The dinner was to be held at Vittoria's, an upscale Italian restaurant known more for its intimidating wine list and high prices than its actual food. It was, in short, my mother's favorite kind of place, one designed for performance. I knew my attendance was not optional, it was a command performance. For my family, appearances were everything, and the appearance of a happy, successful family unit was the most important one of all, even if one of the components, me, was considered defective. I spent the day of the dinner in a state of low-grade dread. It wasn't that I wasn't proud of Jessica. I was, genuinely. She had worked incredibly hard, dedicating 3 years of her life to the grueling demands of law school. The problem wasn't Jessica's success. It was the way my family used it as a yardstick against which my own perceived failures were measured. My brother, Mark, was a real estate agent who, despite a flashy car and expensive suits, was always between big deals. My mother, a retired teacher, saw the world in a rigid hierarchy of respectable professions: doctors, lawyers, engineers. My chosen path, starting a tech company from my cramped apartment with nothing but a laptop and an idea, was incomprehensible to her. It wasn't a real job. It was a hobby, a phase I was going through before I inevitably came to my senses and got a stable, respectable job with a pension. The fact that I dressed in jeans and hoodies, worked odd hours, and didn't have a corner office with a mahogany desk only confirmed their suspicions. I was the family's resident underachiever, the creative but misguided soul who was finding herself well into her late 20s. As I got ready, I chose my outfit with care, knowing it would be scrutinized. I settled on a simple, elegant black dress, tailored but understated. It was expensive, but its quality was in the fabric and the cut, not in a flashy logo. I paired it with simple jewelry and flat shoes, a practical choice that I knew my mother would interpret as a lack of effort. She preferred Jessica's style, bright, brand-name dresses and heels that made her tower over everyone. As I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, but I knew that wasn't what my family would see. They would see plain. They would see broke. Walking into Vittoria's was like stepping onto a stage. The restaurant was dimly lit, with heavy velvet curtains and white tablecloths that seemed to absorb all sound, creating a hushed, reverent atmosphere. My family was already seated at a large, round table in a semi-private alcove. My mother, Eleanor, sat at the head, her posture ramrod straight, a queen surveying her court. My brother, Mark, was to her right, already swirling a glass of red wine and laughing a little too loudly. Jessica, the guest of honor, was next to him, looking radiant but slightly nervous. And next to her was a man I didn't recognize, older, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an impeccably tailored suit. This must be her boss, the senior partner she'd mentioned. The final seat, a temporary-looking chair squeezed between the wall and my mother, was clearly meant for me. I took a deep breath and approached the table. "Sorry I'm a little late," I began, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "Traffic was." My mother cut me off before I could finish. Her eyes swept over me, a flicker of disapproval in them as they landed on my flats. "Danielle, you're here." It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. "We've already ordered appetizers. Don't expect a real seat, you're just the broke one." She gestured dismissively toward the sad-looking chair that had been hastily added to the table. We had to add a setting, make it quick. The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. A few people at a nearby table glanced over. The man I didn't know, Jessica's boss, looked up from his menu, his expression unreadable. Jessica F. Lushed, a wave of pink creeping up her neck. She opened her mouth to say something, perhaps to defend me, but Mark beat her to it. He smirked, that familiar, condescending grin that he'd perfected since we were kids. "Careful," he said, loud enough for the entire alcove to hear. "She might try to pay for her meal with coupons." He let out a short, barking laugh, and a couple of my cousins, seated further down, chuckled along with him, eager to stay in my mother's good graces. The laughter felt like a physical blow. It wasn't just the words, it was the casual cruelty, the public performance of my humiliation. This was my role in the family drama, the cautionary tale, the one they could all look down on to feel better about themselves. My success was invisible to them because it didn't come with the trappings they understood. I didn't have a fancy job title at a big company. I didn't drive a luxury car. I lived simply because I was reinvesting every spare dollar back into my company, growing it, scaling it, preparing for a future they couldn't even imagine. To them, my simple life wasn't a choice. It was a failure. I stood there for a moment, the heat rising in my cheeks. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to walk out and never look back. But that's what they expected. They expected me to be weak, to crumble under their judgment. And then there was Jessica. Despite her silence, I could see the conflict in her eyes. This was her night, and I wouldn't ruin it by causing a scene. And more than that, a new feeling was taking root beneath the hurt and anger, a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a performance. Fine, I'd give them one, but it wouldn't be the one they were expecting. I pulled the chair out, its legs scraping loudly against the polished floor, and sat down. I met my mother's gaze, my expression carefully neutral. "Coupons?" I said, my voice steady. "No, I was just going to ask Mark if he finally closed that big real estate deal he's been talking about for the last 6 months." The smirk vanished from Mark's face. My mother's lips thinned into a tight line. The laughter died. A tense silence fell over the table. It was in that moment of silence that Jessica, desperate to break the tension, quickly made the introductions. "Mom, Mark, everyone," she said, her voice a little too bright. "This is my boss, Mr. Chen. Mr. Chen, this is my family. My mother, Alina, my brother, Mark, and my sister, Danielle." Mr. Chen nodded politely, his gaze lingering on me for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps. He had witnessed the entire exchange, the casual cruelty, and my quiet defiance. The stage was set, the players were in place, but the script for the evening was about to be completely rewritten. The dinner conversation started, or rather, restarted with a forced, brittle energy. My mother, a master at steering conversations back to her preferred topics, immediately began lavishing praise on Jessica. "David," she said, addressing Mr. Chen with an unearned familiarity, "we are just so immensely proud of our Jessica. She has always been the brilliant one. Top of her class, always. We knew she was destined for great things, unlike some." The "some" was left hanging in the air, but every eye at the table, including Mr. Chen's, flickered toward me for a split second. I focused on meticulously cutting a piece of calamari, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I had learned long ago that the only way to survive these family gatherings was to build a fortress of indifference around myself. Mark, having recovered from my earlier jab, jumped in, eager to reassert his position. "Absolutely, law is a real profession. Stability, respect. It's not like tinkering with computers in your bedroom." He gestured vaguely in my direction. "Jess is going to be a partner at your firm in no time, right, Mr. Chen? She's got the drive." Mr. Chen offered a noncommittal smile. "Jessica is a very promising associate. She has a bright future." His praise was professional, measured, but my mother and brother took it as a resounding confirmation of their beliefs. They beamed, preening as if they themselves had passed the bar. The entire meal became a performance piece titled "The Wonderful, Successful Family -1." They recounted Jessica's academic achievements, from her 3rd grade spelling bee victory to her summa cum laude graduation. They talked about Mark's high-powered real estate career, glossing over the fact that his sales record was less than stellar. They spoke of money, of status, of the right neighborhoods and the right schools. It was a language I understood, but refused to speak. My world was one of code, of user experience, of seed funding, and server uptime. It was a world that was, in many ways, more real and impactful than theirs, but because it lacked a physical, mahogany-desk reality, it was dismissed. Every so oft, a comment would be lobbed in my direction, a little grenade of passive aggression designed to put me in my place. "Danielle, you're so quiet. Still working on that little website of yours?" my Aunt Carol asked from across the table. "It's an app development company, Carol," I corrected her gently. "Oh, right, an app, like for games?" she asked, her tone making it sound as frivolous as possible. Before I could explain, Mark cut in. "Don't worry, Danielle. When one of my big commissions comes through, I'll hire you to build me a website, give you some real portfolio work." The table chuckled. The implication was clear. My work wasn't real. It was practice. It was child's play. I ate my risotto in silence, letting their words wash over me. It was a familiar feeling, this sense of being an outsider in my own family. It had been this way for years. When I dropped out of my prestigious business school program with one semester to go, they had been horrified. I tried to explain that I had an idea, a vision for a company that couldn't wait. I told them that the things I needed to learn weren't in textbooks anymore. They didn't hear vision, they heard quitter. They saw me trading a guaranteed path to a six-figure corporate job for a gamble, and in their risk-averse world, that was the ultimate sin. They never asked about the specifics of my company. They never asked about my clients, my revenue, or my growth. They simply filed me away under disappointment and moved on. The irony was that the seed money for my company had come from my own savings, money I had earned through scholarships and part-time jobs during college, money they assumed I had squandered. I had lived frugally, not because I was broke, but because I was building something. Every dollar I didn't spend on a fancy car or designer clothes was a brick in the foundation of my future. "So, Danielle, what is it that you do exactly?" The question came from Mr. Chen. His voice was calm, cutting through the self-congratulatory chatter. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to me. It was a genuine question, but coming from him, a man of obvious status and success, it felt like a test. My mother shifted uncomfortably, probably worried I would embarrass them all by describing my hobby. "I run a company called Innovate Forward," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "We design and build custom mobile applications for businesses." Mark scoffed. "So you make phone games?" "No," I said, my voice firm. "We create enterprise-level solutions. Logistical management, software, secure internal communication platforms, data analytics interfaces. We help companies streamline their operations." I used the simplest terms I could, but I knew the concepts were alien to them. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said, the way one might talk to a child who has just shown them a macaroni necklace. "Well, it's good to have a little something to keep you busy." She then turned back to Mr. Chen, eager to change the subject. "David, you must tell us about your firm. Jessica says you're expanding internationally." The conversation shifted, leaving me once again on the periphery, but something had changed. Mr. Chen didn't immediately launch into a monologue about his firm. He remained quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. He had been watching me, I realized. He wasn't just observing the family dynamics, he was assessing them. He had heard their dismissive comments, their condescending tone. He had seen me absorb the blows without flinching. Unlike my family, who saw only what they wanted to see, he was an unknown variable. He was a man who dealt in facts and the evidence in front of him, the way I carried myself, the way I spoke about my work, however briefly, didn't seem to line up with the family's narrative of me being the broke one. I watched as he subtly pulled out his phone, placing it in his lap beneath the table. The screen glowed faintly. He typed something, his thumb moving quickly across the glass. Then he put it away. It was a small, almost imperceptible action, but it sent a ripple of unease through me. What had he just done? The jabs, the insults, the casual cruelty, I was used to them. But the feeling of being truly seen, especially by a man of his caliber, was something entirely new. and it was far more terrifying than any insult my brother could ever throw at me. The main course arrived, providing a temporary distraction. Waiters bustled around the table, placing plates of ossobuco and lobster ravioli in front of my family. I had ordered a simple pasta dish, a choice that did not go unnoticed by my mother. "Just the pasta, Danielle. You should eat more. You're so thin," she said, her voice laced with that unique blend of fake concern and pointed judgment she had perfected. It was code for, "You can't even afford a proper meal." I just smiled and said, "It's what I was in the mood for," knowing any other explanation was pointless. The conversation had moved on to Jessica's new apartment, which my mother and father had helped her secure a down payment for. They spoke of square footage and property values, of granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Mark chimed in with his expert real estate opinion, talking about market trends and investment potential. It was another brick in the wall of their success, another way to highlight how I, living in my small rented apartment, simply didn't measure up. I let the conversation flow around me, a familiar hum of materialistic one-upmanship. My own apartment was a strategic choice, low overhead, close to the small office I leased, allowing me to pour capital back into my business. They saw a failure to launch. I saw a smart investment strategy. It was during a lull in the conversation, as my uncle was telling a rambling story about his new golf clubs, that it happened. Mr. Chen, who had been listening politely but with a certain detachment, discreetly took his phone out again. This time, he didn't hide it in his lap. He placed it on the table next to his plate, angling the screen slightly away from Jessica, but directly in my line of sight if I chose to look. It felt deliberate. He wasn't trying to be secretive anymore. My heart began to pound a little faster. He tapped the screen a few times, his brow furrowed in concentration. The name of my company, Innovate Forward, was visible in the search bar. My breath caught in my throat. He was looking me up. He wasn't just taking my family's word for it, he was doing his own due diligence. The search results must have loaded quickly. I saw him scroll once, then again. His expression, which had been one of polite neutrality all evening, began to change. His eyebrows lifted slightly. His lips parted in a silent, almost imperceptible O. He tapped on a link. I couldn't see what it was, but his focus intensified. He scrolled more slowly now, reading. A minute passed, then two. The table was still engrossed in my uncle's golf story, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding. I tried to focus on my pasta, but my hands felt clammy. What was he seeing? Was it the feature in TechCrunch from last month? The interview I did for a popular business podcast? The press release about our recent partnership with a major logistics firm? Or was it just our company website, with its list of high-profile clients? Then his jaw dropped. It wasn't a dramatic, theatrical gesture. It was a genuine, involuntary reaction. His mouth fell open slightly, and his eyes widened. He looked from his phone screen up to me, then back to the screen, as if he couldn't reconcile the two realities. The Danielle his phone was telling him about, the CEO, the founder, the innovator featured in business journals, was not the broke girl in the simple black dress who her family mocked for playing with computers. He stared at me, and in his eyes I saw a dawning comprehension so profound it was almost comical. He saw it all, the condescending remarks, the dismissive tone, my quiet endurance. It all clicked into place for him. He must have made a small sound, an intake of breath, because my mother, who had finally noticed my uncle had finished his story, turned to him. "Is everything all right, David?" she asked, her voice dripping with hostess-like concern. Mr. Chen seemed to shake himself out of a trance. He looked up, his eyes sweeping across the table, at my mother's smug expression, at Mark's arrogant smirk. He looked at Jessica, who was watching him with a concerned frown, and then he looked at me again. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just slowly, deliberately, placed his phone face down on the table. The gesture was louder than any shout. The sudden, sharp rap of the glass on the wood cut through the low hum of the restaurant. Everyone at the table stopped talking. My uncle, who had been about to launch into another story, froze with a breadstick halfway to his mouth. My brother Mark lowered his wine glass. My mother's smile faltered. All eyes turned to Mr. Chen. The air, which had been filled with their self-important chatter, was suddenly thick with a heavy, anxious silence. They didn't know what had just happened, but they sensed a seismic shift in the room's power dynamic. They could feel the ground moving beneath their feet. The table went dead silent. The man they had been trying to impress all night, the symbol of the success they so desperately craved, was staring at the family's designated failure with an expression of utter, unadulterated shock. And in that moment, they knew. They knew they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a new kind of silence, not the comfortable pause between conversations, but a heavy, suffocating blanket of tension. My family members exchanged confused, nervous glances. Their well-rehearsed performance had been interrupted by an unexpected plot twist, and they didn't have a script for this. My mother was the first to break. "David, is something wrong with the food?" she asked, her voice tight. It was a grasping attempt to return to familiar territory, to a problem she could understand and solve by summoning a waiter. Mr. Chen slowly raised his eyes from his phone, which still lay face down on the tablecloth like a dark, silent monolith. He looked at my mother, but his gaze was distant, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "No, Alina," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "The food is fine. I was just distracted." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. His tone made it clear that his distraction was something far more significant than a piece of overcooked fish. He picked up his fork but didn't eat. He simply stared at his plate, lost in thought. The rest of the family tried to restart the conversation, but their efforts were feeble and died out quickly. The easy confidence they displayed all evening had evaporated, replaced by a palpable anxiety. They kept glancing at Mr. Chen, then at me, trying to solve the puzzle. What could have been on that phone? What did he now know that they didn't? Their minds, programmed to think in terms of status and hierarchy, were racing. Had he discovered some terrible secret about me? Some scandal that would bring shame upon them all? The thought that he might have discovered something good about me simply wasn't in their realm of possibility. I could see the gears turning in my brother Mark's head. His expression shifted from confusion to a dawning, resentful suspicion. He looked at me, his eyes narrowed. "What was that all about?" He mouthed at me from across the table. I just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head and looked down at my plate, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was happening faster than I could have ever imagined. I had no plan, no strategy. I was just a spectator to my own life's drama. Mr. Chen finally broke his silence. He cleared his throat and turned to me, completely ignoring my mother and brother. His demeanor had changed entirely. The polite, slightly detached air of a boss at a subordinate's family dinner was gone. He was now looking at me with the focused, analytical gaze of a CEO sizing up a peer. "Danielle," he said, and the way he said my name was different. It held a new resonance, a note of respect that I had never heard from anyone at this table. "Innovate forward, that's your company. I've read about it. There was a feature in Forbes a few months back, wasn't there? The quiet disruptor changing enterprise solutions." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing the bloated egos of my family. Forbes. The name alone was a sacred text in their world. You could see the shock register on their faces. It was a physical reaction. My mother's back went rigid. Mark's jaw, which had been set in a cocky line all night, went slack. Jessica's eyes were wide, darting between Mr. Chen and me. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "That was us." Mr. Chen nodded slowly, as if confirming a major piece of a puzzle. "I remember the article," he continued, his voice still directed only at me. "It mentioned your Series A funding round, $12 million if I recall correctly, led by Northgate Ventures." He paused, letting the number hang in the air. $12 million. The sum was so far beyond my family's comprehension that it sounded like a foreign language. Northgate Ventures was one of the most respected venture capital firms in the country. To my family, it might as well have been a name from another planet. "That's correct," I said simply. Mark made a choked sound, a cross between a scoff and a gasp. That's not possible," he stammered, looking at me as if I'd grown a second head. "You live in that tiny apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car." His entire worldview was crumbling. The simple, visible metrics he used to judge a person's worth, the car, the house, the clothes, were suddenly rendered meaningless. He couldn't compute a reality where someone could be worth millions on paper and not be drowning in flashy consumer goods. "I reinvest in my company, Mark," I said, the explanation feeling hollow even as I said it. It was a concept, sacrificing short-term gratification for long-term growth, that was utterly alien to him. My mother was pale. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. All the years of snide comments, of helpful advice to get a real job, of pitying looks and condescending tones, all of it was now flashing before her eyes, recast in a new, horrifying light. She hadn't been punching down at a failure. She had been belittling a success story far greater than any she could have imagined for her children. The shame was a visible tide, rising in her face. Mr. Chen wasn't finished. He was connecting the dots, not just for himself, but for the entire table. "My law firm, Chen and Associates, has a growing tech law division," he said, his gaze shifting to encompass the whole table, though his words were still clearly for my benefit. "We've been following the sector closely. In fact, we represent one of the investors in Northgate Ventures." He let that sink in. He wasn't just an impressed reader of a magazine, he was a player in my world. He understood the ecosystem I moved in. "The name Danielle Evans," he said, using my full name, "has come up. Founder and CEO, sole majority shareholder, I believe." I just nodded, unable to speak. The validation was overwhelming. Here was this powerful, respected man in front of my entire family, laying out the truth of my life, a truth I had long ago given up trying to explain to them. The final dot was connected. The picture was complete. I wasn't the broke one. I wasn't the cautionary tale. I was the most successful person at the table, and for the first time in my life, they all knew it. The atmosphere wasn't just silent anymore. It was frozen. What followed was not an explosion, but an implosion. My family didn't yell or demand answers. They simply collapsed in on themselves, crushed by the weight of the revelation. The vibrant, boisterous energy that had filled the alcove just 30 minutes earlier had been sucked into a black hole of their own making. Now, there was only the quiet clinking of silverware on plates as I and Mr. Chen continued to eat. Everyone else seemed to have lost their appetite. My mother, Alina, was the most visibly affected. She sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap. Her face, usually so animated with judgment and pride, was a stony, unreadable mask. But I could see the panic in her eyes. She was a woman whose entire identity was built on a carefully constructed social hierarchy, and she had just discovered that she'd placed the queen of the chessboard in the pawn's position. The social calculus of it all was undoubtedly spinning in her head. How could she recalibrate? How could she spin this? The public nature of the humiliation, in front of Jessica's powerful boss, was the ultimate nightmare for her. She had been exposed not just as cruel, but as a fool. My brother, Mark, was a study in impotent rage. He alternately glared at me, then down at his half-eaten steak, stabbing at it with his fork. His arrogance was a shield, and that shield had just been shattered. His entire sense of superiority over me was based on a lie he had helped create. All his boasts about big deals and commissions now sounded like the pathetic ramblings they were, especially in the context of a $12 million funding round. He, the self-proclaimed success, had been unmasked as a small timer in the presence of real achievement. The smirk was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful pout. He couldn't look me in the eye. Jessica, my sister, was caught in the middle. She looked horrified, but her horror seemed to stem more from empathy than from social shame. She kept looking at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and guilt. "Danielle," she whispered my name across the table when Mr. Chen was briefly distracted by a waiter. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question was so absurd, so completely oblivious to the years of dismissiveness, that I almost laughed. Tell them? I had tried to tell them years ago. I had tried to explain my passion, my business plan, my early successes, but they hadn't listened. They had patted me on the head and told me to get a real job. They hadn't wanted to hear it then, so I had simply stopped trying. "You never asked," I replied softly, and the simple truth of that statement seemed to land on her with surprising force. She flinched as if I had struck her. She was right. They had never asked. Not once. They had been so content with their narrative of my failure that they had never bothered to look for evidence to the contrary. The rest of the meal passed in this strained, agonizing silence. Mr. Chen, perhaps sensing that he had dropped a bomb and should now step back, engaged me in quiet, professional conversation. He asked me about the challenges of scaling a tech company, about my philosophy on user-centric design, about the future of AI integration in logistics. He spoke to me as an equal, a contemporary. The rest of the table was forced to sit and listen to a conversation they could not comprehend, conducted in a language of success they did not speak. It was, I realized, the most exquisitely painful and fitting revenge I could have ever imagined, and I hadn't even planned it. My very existence, when viewed through the correct lens, was my revenge. The power of silence was absolute. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to say, "I told you so." I didn't need to list my accomplishments or throw their insults back in their faces. My silence, my calm demeanor as I discussed Series A funding with a top law firm's senior partner, was more damning than any tirade. It showed them that their opinions, their validation, their world had ceased to matter to me long ago. I had built my success not in spite of them, but entirely without them. They were not a factor in my equation. And that realization, I could see, was what hurt them the most. They had been rendered irrelevant to the most successful chapter of their own family's story. When the check arrived, another moment of excruciating awkwardness descended. My mother and Mark both reached for it out of habit, a gesture of their perceived status as the family's providers. But their hands froze midair. The gesture was now utterly meaningless. What was a $500 dinner bill in the face of $12 million? Before they could decide who would take the hollow prize, I pulled my wallet out of my purse. I placed a black, featureless credit card on the tray. The card was heavy, made of metal, and it landed with a solid, definitive clink. "It's on me," I said, my voice neutral. "Congratulations on passing the bar, Jessica." I looked at my sister, offering her a genuine smile. "I'm really proud of you." For the first time all night, I focused solely on her, cutting the rest of the family out of the moment. Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, Danny," she choked out. The waiter took the card. My mother watched it go with a pained expression, as if she were watching her entire worldview being carried away on a small silver tray. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. I had paid the bill, but they were the ones who were about to pay the price. As the waiter walked away with my card, Mr. Chen leaned forward slightly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He had observed the entire final act, the check, the card, my pointed congratulations to Jessica, with keen interest. He folded his hands on the table, a clear signal that business was about to be discussed. "Danielle," he began, his voice drawing the attention of the entire shell-shocked table. "As I mentioned, my firm is making a concerted effort to expand our technology and intellectual property division. We're actively seeking to partner with the most innovative companies in the region." He paused, looking directly at me. "Your company, Innovate Forward, is precisely the kind of client we want to represent. Your work in logistics and secure data management is groundbreaking." My mind raced. This was no longer just a family dinner. It had transformed into an impromptu business meeting. My mother and brother seemed to shrink in their chairs, becoming unwilling spectators at a game played leagues above their heads. "We represent several companies that have gone through successful acquisitions and IPOs," Mr. Chen continued, his voice smooth and confident. "We handle everything: patent law, corporate structuring, international compliance. Given your recent funding and rapid growth, you'll need a legal team that can anticipate challenges 3 steps ahead. My team is the best in the city." It was a direct, powerful pitch from a man who clearly didn't waste time. But it was more than that. It was a strategic move, made in front of my family and his own employee, Jessica. He was publicly aligning himself with me, with my success. He was drawing a clear line in the sand. On one side was the future, innovation, and success me. On the other side was them. Before I could formulate a response, Jessica spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Chen, that's amazing. Danielle, my firm is incredible. They could do so much for you. She looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. I could see what she was thinking. This was a bridge. This was a way for her to connect her world with mine, a way to potentially repair the damage. If I became a client at her firm, it would be a link between us. A professional validation that might, in her mind, translate into a personal one. I looked at Jessica, and for the first time I felt a pang of sympathy. She was trapped. She loved our mother and brother, but she had just witnessed their casual cruelty and profound ignorance. Now she saw a potential lifeline being thrown not to her, but to me, the sister she had allowed to be marginalized. Her career, which had been the shining centerpiece of the evening, was suddenly overshadowed. I then turned my attention back to Mr. Chen. His offer was genuinely intriguing. My company was growing at a pace where our current small-town lawyer was becoming inadequate. We needed a heavyweight firm to handle the complexities of our next phase of growth. Chen and Associates was, without question, one of the best, but accepting his offer here, now, felt complicated. It felt like playing a part in their drama, a drama I had spent years trying to escape. My mother, finally finding her voice, saw an opportunity. "Oh, Danielle, you must," she exclaimed, her tone a ghastly imitation of maternal pride. "A partnership with Mr. Chen's firm? Think of what that would mean for Jessica. You could help your sister's career." It was a stunningly transparent pivot. Unable to claim my success as her own, she was now trying to leverage it for Jessica's benefit, attempting to reassert her role as the family matriarch, the master facilitator. Mark chimed in, his tone slick and opportunistic. "Yeah, Danny, keep it in the family. You'd be their biggest client, I bet. You could get Jess a corner office." He was already trying to figure out how my success could benefit him, how he could ride my coattails. The shame had worn off, replaced by a greedy, desperate ambition. Their words clarified everything for me. They still didn't get it. They didn't see me, Danielle, the person. They saw a resource. They saw an asset to be deployed for their own social and professional gain. My success wasn't something for me to be proud of, it was something for them to use. I held up a hand, and the table fell silent again. I looked at Mr. Chen, acknowledging the immense professional courtesy he was extending. "Mr. Chen," I said, my voice calm and measured, "your firm's reputation is impeccable, and your offer is very generous. I am genuinely honored that you would consider Innovate Forward a worthy client." I paused, letting the formal words settle. "And I will give it the consideration it deserves." Then I turned my gaze to my family, to my mother, to Mark, and finally to Jessica. "However," I continued, my voice losing its corporate politeness and gaining a sharp, personal edge, "my decision will have absolutely nothing to do with keeping it in the family. My company is the result of 7 years of 16-hour days. It was built on sleepless nights, on financial risks you called foolish, and on a belief in myself when no one else in this family did." I looked at my mother. "You called me the broke one tonight in front of a guest. You didn't do it to be funny. You did it to hurt and humiliate me because my life choices made you uncomfortable." I turned to Mark. "You joked about me using coupons. You've spent years belittling my work as a hobby because it threatened your fragile ego to imagine your little sister might be more successful than you." Finally, I looked at Jessica. My voice softened, but the steel remained. "And you, Jess, I love you and I am so proud of you. But you sat there tonight and for years and you said nothing. Your silence was a choice. It was easier to let me be the family punching bag than to stand up to them." The truth laid bare was brutal. Jessica flinched, tears now streaming down her face. My mother looked aghast, a flush of anger replacing her pallor. Mark just glared, his jaw tight. I stood up from the table, my napkin placed neatly beside my plate. "So, to be clear," I said, my voice ringing with finality, "I will make my decision based on one single criterion: what is best for my company, the company that I built, alone." I turned back to Mr. Chen and extended my hand. "Thank you for the wonderful conversation, Mr. Chen. My assistant will be in touch with your office on Monday to schedule a formal meeting to discuss your proposal." He stood and shook my hand, his grip firm. "I look forward to it, Ms. Evans," he said, the use of my formal title a final, definitive statement. The offer was on the table, but the power to accept or reject it, and on what terms, was mine and mine alone. I had walked into the restaurant as the family failure. I was walking out as a CEO they had to beg for an appointment. I walked out of Vittoria's without a backward glance. The cool night air felt like a balm on my skin, washing away the suffocating atmosphere of the restaurant. I didn't wait for the valet. I just walked the few blocks to where I had parked my 10-year-old reliable sedan, the car my brother so often mocked. As I drove home, I wasn't filled with triumph or glee. I just felt a profound sense of weary release, as if I had finally put down a heavy burden I had been carrying for years. The fallout began the next morning. My phone was bombarded with messages. First, a long, rambling text from my mother, a bizarre mix of feigned apology, defensiveness, and a not-so-subtle plea for me to hire Jessica's firm. It spoke of misunderstandings and how she always knew I had it in me, a blatant attempt to rewrite history. It ended with, "We are family, Danielle and family supports each other." I didn't reply. Then came the call from Mark. He didn't apologize. Instead, he launched into a half-baked business pitch, suggesting a strategic partnership where he could handle the real estate needs for my company's inevitable expansion. He talked about office parks and investment properties, trying to speak my language but failing miserably. He saw me as a walking, talking dollar sign, his golden ticket. I listened for a minute before interrupting him. "Mark, I have a meeting." "I have to go," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The most painful message was from Jessica. It was a S. Imple, heartfelt text. "I am so sorry, Danny, for everything. I was a coward. I hope one day you can forgive me." Of all the messages, hers was the only one that felt real. It was the only one that acknowledged the truth of what had happened, not just last night, but for years. I sent her a short reply. "I need some time, Jess, but thank you." A week later, I had the meeting at Chen and Associates. I didn't go alone. I brought my COO and my lead counsel. We met with Mr. Chen and two of his top IP lawyers. Jessica was not in the room. It was a professional, thorough, and impressive meeting. They understood our business model, our challenges, and our potential. Professionally, they were the perfect fit. At the end of the meeting, Mr. Chen walked me out. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice low, "Jessica is a fine paralegal, and she will be a good lawyer. But she put in a formal request this morning to be assigned to a different department. She said that if we were to retain you as a client, she felt it would be a conflict of interest for her to be in any way involved." I nodded, a strange mix of sadness and respect for my sister. It was the first time she had ever put a true, ethical boundary between herself and our family's enmeshment. It was a step. I decided to retain Mr. Chen's firm. It was the smart business move. My loyalty was to my company and my employees, and they deserved the best representation. My decision sent another shockwave through my family. My mother called, furious that I hadn't insisted Jessica be put on the account. "After all we've done for you," she'd shrieked. The "we" was laughable. I calmly explained that it was Jessica's own decision, born of a professionalism that she and Mark clearly lacked. The dynamic of my family is forever changed. The old hierarchy is shattered. There are no more snide comments about my job, no more jokes about coupons. They are replaced by an awkward, fawning deference that is, in its own way, just as unpleasant. They call before they text. They ask about my work with a hollow, forced interest. They are desperate to be included in my new world, but they don't have the password to get in, because the password is authenticity and respect, currencies they never traded in. I see Jessica for coffee sometimes. Our conversations are stilted, hesitant. We are trying to find our way back to being sisters, but the foundation is cracked. She is going to therapy, trying to learn how to have a backbone. I am proud of her for that. But trust, once broken, is not easily mended. As for my mother and Mark, our relationship is transactional at best. I see them at holidays for the sake of keeping a fragile peace. But the warmth is gone, replaced by the cold reality of what they are, people who only value you when you have something they want. They didn't respect me when they thought I was a struggling artist. They only fear me as a CEO. Their change of heart wasn't born of love or remorse. It was born of a shift in the power ledger. That is the price of their disrespect. They haven't lost a daughter or a sister. You can't lose something you never truly valued. No, they've lost access. They've lost the right to have an opinion, the privilege of my time, and the warmth of my trust. They sit on the outside now, looking in at a life I built not just without their help, but in spite of their judgment. And I have learned that the silence that now exists between us is more valuable than any apology they could ever offer.